Hey everybody, this is Miss Jurgens here, and I just wanted to create a video reviewing order of operations with all of you. I've gotten a couple emails about, wanting to make sure we understand what the order of operations are and why it's important that we do them that way. So I'm going to do a few examples here on the screen. I want to start by just saying what the order of operations are. So we start with looking for grouping symbols. This is anytime we're solving a math problem. I know some people think of PEMDAS, and Ms. Kloppenborg and I like to use GEMDAS because PEMDAS just talks about parentheses, and parentheses are a type of grouping symbol. But you also want to look for things like brackets. Those are also a form of grouping symbol. So we talk about all different kinds of grouping symbols, not just parentheses. But when you're solving any sort of math problem, a math sentence, you want to look for those grouping symbols first because, the order of operations is just the order that you do your calculations in. So you start with grouping symbols. If you see anything inside of grouping symbols, you want to do that first. The next thing you're going to look for is an exponent. If you see an exponent, remember that's when you have a number and then you have the little number up here. That's our exponent, is that little itty bitty 2. And what that tells us is it tells us how many times we're going to multiply this big number. That's called our base. So if I have 4 to the second power, that's how I would read that. That would mean that I'm taking 4 times itself. I'm doing that 2 times because my exponent is 2. So I would be taking 4 times 4. So 4 squared would be 16. All right, so now after I've looked for my exponents, I'm going to do the multiplication and the division. So we're looking for multiplication symbols and division symbols there. When we do the multiplication and division, even though it's written M and then D, you can divide before you multiply. When it comes to the multiplication and the division, you do want to do those in the order you see them in the problem. So if you have multiplication first in the problem, we read it left to right like you would a sentence, then you would do the multiplication first. If you've got division first in the problem, then you would do the division first. So we kind of write them on the same level because you kind of do them at the same time. They're like the third step in the order of operations, but you do them in the order that you read them left to right. And I will go through an example of that. And then you've also have addition and subtraction are the last two. So you're looking for that plus and that minus symbol. And they're similar to multiplication and division. You want to do them in the order that you read them, left to right. So they're the last thing you look for. It's your last step. But if you see addition or subtraction, you want to do whichever one you see first. So I'm going to do an example up here. I'm going to leave what I've already written on the screen for you guys. I'm going to do kind of a simple one to begin with. So if I have 6 plus 2 times 4, I'm just going to go down this in order. So I'm going to start with the G, and I'm going to look, are there any grouping symbols here? Do I have parentheses? Do I have brackets? And I can see that I don't. There's no parentheses. There's no brackets. So I've done my grouping. I can check that off. I'm going to go down to exponents. I'm going to see, are there any exponents in this example? And if I look, I don't see any exponents, so I can check that off. There's nothing for me to do there. Next, I'm looking for any multiplication or division. So when I go through this problem, I do see that I have 2 times 4. That's multiplication. So I want to go ahead and solve that part of this problem. 2 times 4 is 8. So I'm going to write that down. And then I keep everything else that's already here. So I have my 6, and then I also have that plus. I need to keep that in my problem here because I'm not done with that yet. I haven't solved that part. I can still look, there's no division, so I can go ahead and check this off. The last thing I'm looking for is that addition and subtraction, and I do have 6 plus 8. So I want to go ahead and finish solving that. 6 plus 8 is going to give me 14. So that would be my final answer. There's no other addition and subtraction left for me to do. I don't have any other operations for me to go through and solve. So I'm done with this problem. That would be my answer. Let's do a couple more. So I'm going to erase these check marks so I can go back and solve them. I'm going to erase this problem. And let's do this one here. Let's say I have 15 divided by 3 plus 6 times 2. I'm still going to start at the beginning again. I look for those grouping symbols. I don't see parentheses. I don't see exponents. So there's no grouping symbols for me to go through and solve or simplify here. Second, I look for those exponents. Again, I'm not seeing any exponents, so I can go ahead and check that off. Here I'm looking for that multiplication and division. And when I look at this problem, I see that I have a division here, and I also have multiplication. Now remember, even though we read it multiplication and division, MD in GEMDAS, I do whichever one comes first in the problem when I read it left to right. So since I have 15 divided by 3, I'm going to do that first. That's the first thing that happens in my problem. The division is read first in this particular example. So I'm going to take 15 divided by 3, and that gives me 5. I still have plus 6. And I still have my times 2. I haven't finished that multiplication yet. So I'm going to look again. I still have the multiplication here, so I'm not done with multiplication and division. I want to go ahead and solve 6 times 2. So 6 times 2 gives me 12. I still have my 5 and my plus. I haven't done that addition yet, so I need to make sure I copy that down exactly as I see it. There's no more multiplication and division left, so I can check that off. The last thing I'm looking for is that addition and subtraction, and I am still adding in this problem. So I want to go ahead and take 5 plus 12, and that does give me 17. There's no other operations left, so I know that 17 is my final answer, and I can check that off. So that's our second example. I'm going to go ahead and go through a couple more here. I have, let's see, 2 more problems written down for us to go through together. Maybe we'll do 3. Let me erase this problem here. All right. So the next one I want to go through is, let's say I have 6 parenthesis 6 plus 4 parenthesis times 3. In this example, when I start with the G, when I'm looking for the grouping symbols, I do see that I have a pair of parentheses right here. I've got these parentheses, and that's 6 plus 4. So even though I'm adding here, and normally addition and subtraction is the last thing we do, since they're in the parentheses, I have to do it first. Those grouping symbols, they're the first thing I look for. So I've got to do whatever inside the grouping symbols. So I am going to go ahead and take 6 plus 4, and that gives me 10. Since I've solved everything inside the parentheses, I don't need to copy them down again. I can just finish copying down the rest of the problem. I've got that times 3. Since there's no other grouping symbols, I can go ahead and check that off. Looking for exponents, no exponents, I can check that off. Multiplication and division, I do have multiplication here. I am taking 10 times 3, that's multiplication. So I want to go ahead and solve that. 10 times 3 gives me 30. So no other multiplication and division. And there's also no addition or subtraction here. I'm left with just 30 as my answer. So I can check that off. And that's my answer, is 30. I'm going to have to rewrite that G there. And that, there we go. All right, couple more. Let's see, what if I have 50, ooh, big number, minus 4 squared times 2. I'm looking for those grouping symbols. No grouping symbols in this example, so I can go ahead and check that off. Next, I'm looking for the exponent. And here I do see I have an exponent here. 4 squared, or 4 to the second power, that's my exponent. So I want to go ahead and solve that. I want to do that exponent next. And I've already, coincidentally, I've done the math here. 4 squared tells me I multiply 4 by itself. So I'm taking 4 times 4, which gives me 16. So I can go ahead and write down 16. But just as a reminder, we do just take 4 times 4 there, and that gives us 16. I still have my times 2, and I still have 50 minus. So I want to make sure I copy those down exactly as I see them. There's no other exponents, so I can go ahead and check that off. Next, I'm looking for that multiplication and division, and I do have 16 times 2 here. That's multiplication. So I want to go ahead and solve that. When I take 16 times 2, I get 32, and I can still copy down 50 minus. There's no other multiplication and division, so I can check that off. Last thing I see is subtraction, and that's part of our last step. So I can take 50 minus 32, and when you do that, you should get 18. You can always do your math off to the side here. So if I were to do this and I would write it this way, I would take 50 minus 32. I can't take 0 minus 2. I've got to borrow. So I'm going to cross my 5 out. When I borrow 1, that gives me a 4. I bring that 1 over, and now I have 10 minus 2. That's 8. And 4 minus 3 is 1. So that's how we get this 18 here. All right, I have one more example for all of you. All right, so for this last problem, sorry about that. For this last problem, I'm going to go ahead and erase that. I hadn't erased that yet. Keep my division there. This one's going to be kind of the trickiest problem. So I'm going to go ahead and write it out. I've got 6 plus 2 to the third power, or cubed. That's a 3, just so you guys know. And my parentheses, divided by 2. All right, so let's do these in order. I'm looking for my grouping symbols, and I do have grouping symbols here. I've got this 6 plus 2 cubed. All right, now when we're inside of those grouping symbols, when we look inside those parentheses, we still follow the order of operations. So I've got 6 plus 2 cubed. In order of operations, exponents comes before addition and subtraction, right? So I need to do my 2 to the third power before I take my addition there. So I want to go ahead and do that exponent part. And 2 to the third power means I'm multiplying 2 3 times. So I'm taking 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, times another 2 gives me 8. So I know that 2 cubed is 8. I still have my parenthesis there. I still have my parenthesis here, and my 6 plus. Everything there is still inside my parentheses. I haven't finished that yet, but I can go ahead and copy everything down again. Since I still have my parentheses, I'm still in this first step. I'm still in grouping. I still need to finish solving that. But there's only one thing left in that grouping, so I can go ahead and take 6 plus 8, and that does give you 14. So we have 14. There's nothing left in my grouping symbols, so I can go ahead and divide that by 2. So I did my grouping. There's no other exponents left. We did do that exponent that was inside the grouping symbols. I'm done with that. So now I'm looking for the multiplication and division, and I am dividing here. I do take 14 divided by 2, and that gives me 7. There's no addition and subtraction left to do, so 7 is going to be my final answer there. If you guys have any questions, please make sure that you email me if you need to, and feel free to go back and rewatch this video if you want to look through those examples again. All right, thank you so much.